Minty's eyes were heavy. Her head bobbed up and down as she faded in and out of sleep. She pinched herself to try to stay awake, but the house was so quiet and calm. Even the tree frogs, crickets, and other creatures of the night had stopped chirping and croaking. It seemed all of Maryland was asleep at this late hour, except young Minty. At age 6, Minty should have been asleep too. Her body and mind cried out for sleep, yet she dared not doze off, for fear she would not hear the baby crying. This baby was Minty's responsibility. She watched over the baby day and night, rocked him to sleep, kept him warm in his blanket, and sang songs to keep him happy. Minty would do anything in her power to keep him happy, for she knew that if he cried, she would be punished. And so each time the baby stirred in his crib, each time he whimpered or moaned, Minty's heart raced. As soon as the baby cried out, even if he only cried for a moment, the baby's mother would get very angry with Minty. This was the awful, painful reality in which Minty lived, because Minty was an enslaved African person. Even at the tender age of 6 years old, she was forced to work for no pay all day long, every day. And Minty thought she would be enslaved her entire life until she died. This was the terrible truth of slavery. Minty and other enslaved Africans like her had no rights or freedom. Minty would be forced to do the hard work given to her from sun up to sundown, providing great value to the plantation owner almost every day of her entire life. Very, very little of Minty's time would ever be her own to do with as she wished. This is what life was like for millions of people in the United States of America when Minty was 6. In fact, this is what life had been like for many people for a long time, long before Minty or her parents and grandparents were born. One night, Minty asked her mother how and why she and her family had become enslaved. "Well, your grandmother," her mother told her, "she came over the ocean on a great big ship. She came from a place called Africa. Many Africans are here now, enslaved in this land they call the United States." "Why did grandmother and the other Africans come here?" Minty asked. "It was not their choice to come here from Africa," her mother explained. "Africans were captured by men with guns and other weapons who wanted to bring them to America to work in slavery. They were put on these ships against their will, and then they were brought to this country and sent to places like plantations, farms, businesses, or households to work. That is why our life is the way it is. We do as we are told, and we do our best to survive." By this, Minty's mother meant they worked hard to keep their families as safe and healthy as possible. Minty's father and mother had 9 children, including Minty. But, like most enslaved Africans, the family did not live or work together all in one home. Minty's mother worked for a man named Edward Broadus. Minty's father worked for a man named Edward Thompson, whose plantation was down the road from the Broadus home. 3 of Minty's sisters were sent away to work for plantation owners in Georgia. Minty never saw any of them again. As her mother said, enslaved people did not have a choice or say in the matter. The plantation owners did whatever they had to do to make as much money as possible from their plantations and slave labor. Because families of enslaved Africans often could not live together or were separated, they depended on the community of the enslaved Africans on the plantation. Mothers and fathers would take care of children who were not their own. Enslaved Africans helped and supported each other as communities by looking out for each other and working together. In this way, they could be strong together, despite the fact that they were enslaved. Although life was hard for the enslaved people, this working together and helping each other contributed to their survival and made it better. Where Minty lived, the enslaved Africans worked hard to perform many jobs that added value to the plantation. They took care of the horses and tended crops of tobacco, corn, and hay, plowing, planting, and harvesting. In the winter, they chopped wood, mended fences, and helped clear more land for farming. Many enslaved people were skilled at a trade. Some tended to the farm animals and butchers preserved the meat. Weavers, spinners, and seamstresses were involved in the process of making clothing. Their skills were valued. Skilled carpenters constructed and repaired buildings and made furniture, and blacksmiths used iron to make and mend important tools for the life and work of the plantation. Many lived in shacks with dirt floors, had one set of tattered clothes and no shoes, and didn't have enough to eat. Most enslaved Africans worked out in the fields, performing the many difficult tasks involved in growing and harvesting the crops. They were known as field slaves, and they lived the hardest lives of all. They worked from early morning until late at night, often with no relief from the heat or rest from their hard labor. They always worked under the watchful eye of the overseers, people who kept watch over and directed the enslaved people. The enslaved people always worked under the threat of punishment. Other enslaved Africans worked in what was known as the Big House, the beautiful mansion belonging to the plantation owners. They did not have to work in the hot sun. They wore nicer clothes than the field slaves, and they sometimes had access to more food than the field slaves. In addition to daily cooking and cleaning, house slaves helped make butter, wash the household laundry, and care for the plantation owner's young children. That was Minty's job, which was why she was watching the baby at night. Just like those who worked in the fields, enslaved Africans who worked in the house worked hard. But also, like the people who worked in the fields, they helped each other a lot. And this made it less hard and less sad. Plantations, like the one where Minty and other enslaved Africans lived and worked, were common throughout Maryland and all of the states in the southern United States or the South. The South had rich soil and endless farmland. Those who owned the land could get rich by growing and selling tobacco, cotton, and other crops. Running a large plantation required many workers. There were no tractors or other machines to help in those days. The enslaved Africans working on a plantation contributed valuable skills and labor to the success of the plantation. Without the enslaved Africans, the plantation could not be run. They did many important jobs of all kinds. Even so, rather than hiring workers and paying them, plantation owners, who were white, forced people who were black to work for free in a life of slavery. The plantation owners thought they could treat these African people this way because they looked different. Because of this difference in the way they looked, the plantation owners thought they were better than the people they enslaved. As enslaved people, they were not given any wages for the work they did on the plantations. Millions of Africans were taken from their homes and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean to live a life in slavery. And the children of the enslaved Africans, children like Minty and her sisters and brothers, automatically became enslaved the very moment they were born. They would likely remain enslaved until they died. As Minty's mother explained, enslaved people did not have the choice to be free people. Or did they? Early on, Minty began to wonder whether it was possible to resist or fight back as an enslaved person. She wondered this because she had, in fact, seen her own mother resist the plantation owner's wishes. When Minty was young, Mr. Broadress arranged to send her brother Moses to a plantation belonging to another owner. Minty's mother had already seen 3 of her daughters sent far away to another plantation down south, and she was determined not to lose any more of her children. When Mr. Broadress came to fetch Moses to send him away with the other plantation owner, Minty's mother stood in the doorway and promised, "I will not allow any more of my children to be taken away." Something in her eyes must have scared Mr. Broadress that day, because he turned around and he never tried to send Moses or anyone else in Minty's family away again. This event gave Minty a shred of hope that one day she might be able to fight back and possibly win her freedom.